We hope you enjoy the following video presentation sponsored by the C.S. Lewis Foundation. We are a nonprofit organization with a mission to equip and encourage Christians to live their faith within the world of ideas and arts. To help us continue to host events and make videos like this one, please make a donation after viewing the video by going to www.cslewis.org or clicking the link below. Thank you.
Dr. Diana Pavlac Glyer. She is professor of English at Azusa Pacific University in Southern California. She is a highly respected scholar and teacher, a wonderful teacher. In fact, APU has an interesting process. Every year, the faculty of APU, through a rather extensive process, choose a professor of the year. In this last year, Dr. Glyer was named Professor of the Year at APU by her colleagues. That's a wonderful and rare honor. Her meticulous research on the various ways the Inklings as a writing community influenced each other's writing is both high scholarship and a journey into the virtue and importance of friendship and hospitality. Her current research is on Dante's Divine Comedy. I can't wait to see it. And so welcome Dr. Glyer as she comes to explore the theme of hospitality as the intersection of friendship and of virtue and of life together with sensitivity and spiritual wisdom. Let us welcome Dr. Glyer.
Good morning. Thank you very much. Thank you for that fine introduction, Scott. I appreciate that. Thanks to Stan and Gain for the invitation to be here today. Every time I come to Oxbridge, this is my second Oxbridge, and what I'm struck with time and time again is what a rich feast has been laid before us as we gather together in the name of Jesus. Blessed be God. Well, I teach a number of classes at Azusa Pacific University, and it's my honor to teach in the Honors College at APU. And the Honors College follows a great works approach, and there's some misunderstanding about what the nature of a great works approach really is. A lot of folks, when they think about a great works approach, think with a little bit of a guilty feeling about that list, you know, those 100 books you were supposed to read before you graduated from high school. When you think about the great works approach, it helps, I think, to think about it less as a list of books that you should have read, and to think about it more as an approach or a lens that we use to encounter the great texts of the world. Not so much what we read, but how we read it. When we use a great works approach, there are some common features. For one thing, we read the primary texts. We avoid summaries and snippets. We avoid text commentaries. We read the book itself, the whole thing. Secondly, when we use a great books approach, we take our time. We linger. When I teach my Mere Christianity class, we spend an entire semester and we read one book. We really soak in it. We really strive to understand it, thinking deeply about it. We take our time. And as we read Mere Christianity, we do two different kinds of reading. We read Mere Christianity the way that you examine a stained. There we go. We look at it like it's a stained glass window. We linger. We observe. We pay attention to its beauty and its details. We look at it like a stained glass window, but we also look through it. We look through the book like clear glass, like a clear pool of water. We look through the book, trying to understand what larger questions the author is trying to frame for us, and how other authors have framed similar questions. When we look through Mere Christianity, considering it as a clear pane of glass, we try to wrestle together with the three great questions that Lewis is trying to answer in that important book. First, does God exist? Second, what do Christians believe? And third, how should we live? As we read, my students keep reading journals, and I ask them to do something that's very difficult for them. I ask them in their reading journals, before they respond to the text, to first seek to understand it by writing an executive summary. What my students are eager to do is to leap into the text with their own opinions and assumptions, to do all they can to interact with it. And first, I want them to seek to understand. I want them to pay close attention. What does it say? What does this chapter say? What does this paragraph say? What does Lewis have to say? I want them to not ask the question, do I find this interesting? Do I find this challenging, striking, or confusing? Do I agree with this? Those are questions for later. First, we have a mantra, one that guides our study as we read. A mantra that comes from the prayer of St. Francis. O Divine Master, grant that I may not so much seek to be understood as to understand. Now, Lewis himself is a primary advocate of this approach to reading. He articulates it in one of his most important books, An Experiment in Criticism. In that book, Lewis says, quote, "We read in order to remove our gaze from the mirrored face, to deliver us from solitude." Lewis says, "I suggest we should be concerned with entering fully into the opinions and therefore also the attitudes, feelings, and total experience of others." Lewis goes on to ask, well, what is the good of listening to what anyone else has to say? The answer? Unless you contain in yourself sources that can supply all the information, all the entertainment, all the advice, rebuke, and all the merriment you want, the answer is obvious. Lewis continues, if it is worthwhile listening or reading at all, it is worth doing it attentively. Indeed, we must attend even to discover if something is worth our attention. When I teach Mere Christianity, it's an elective class, and so my students come to that text from across the curriculum, from a variety of disciplines. They also come to my class from a variety of spiritual perspectives. In this past semester, in my class full of students, I had one student who came to Mere Christianity from the experience of 12 years at Jesuit school. He sat across the table from a student whose background was Assemblies of God. Another student in that class was inspired by the Red Letter movement of Shane Claiborne, and he happened to be close friends with another student who felt drawn to a very different approach. She attended a local Episcopal church, and she was devoting much of her free time to fighting for the full inclusion of gay and transsexual church members into the larger community. It was one of the most remarkable experiences I've ever had as a professor, and it was one of the most moving experiences I've ever had as a believer. I want you to picture those students as best as you can, 18, 19, and 20-year-old students. Carly's likely to be first to class. She's always done all the reading, and she's always got an opinion to share. Then Andrew wanders in. He's wearing a crisp white shirt and a bow tie. I look over there and I see that Jeremy has dirt under his fingernails. He's been in the garden all morning and just barely made it to class. And somewhere in the back there's Scott. He's looking a little rumpled, a little out of it, like maybe he didn't get much sleep last night. It's a great works class, so we sit around the seminar table and we focus on the text. On the first day of class, I always start with a particular ritual. I pick up a copy of Mere Christianity and I put it in the middle of the table and I say, this semester we'll do all that we can to learn from Professor Lewis. We focus on text. We try the best we can to pay attention, to follow Lewis's advice, to remove our gaze from the mirror, to hear what the text has to say. And Mere Christianity opens with Lewis declaring his intention for his book. He sets out his goal. He says, quote, "My goal is to explain and defend the belief that has been common to nearly all Christians at all times," end quote. Lewis says that his subject is mere Christianity, the highest common factor, the non-negotiable core, the basics of the Christian faith. So what is it that all Christians in all times and all places have all agreed upon? Lewis says in brief that the core of mere Christianity is to be found in the creeds of the church. The Apostles' Creed, the Nicene Creed, Athanasian Creed. But later in the text, he summarizes the essence of mere Christianity in a single, elegant sentence. He says, the death of Jesus Christ has somehow made us right with God. I believe that in defining Christianity this way, Lewis is drawing from Acts chapter 11. That's the story where Peter sees a vision and he goes to the house of Cornelius. It's the story where the gospel is preached to the Gentiles and the Holy Spirit falls on all who hear the message. And Peter's summary of the gospel in Acts 11:36 is this: there is peace with God through Jesus Christ. That's how Peter explains it. Lewis says, the death of Jesus Christ has somehow made us right with God. And then Lewis adds, that is Christianity. That is what must be believed. An elegant and I think useful way to think about what is essential to our faith. Now, much has been said about mere Christianity, but what struck me as I worked this past semester with this very diverse student population is this, that Lewis defines a non-negotiable core of our faith, and then, without skipping a beat, he goes on to emphasize that while we have a great deal in common, we also are very different from one another. Lewis's picture of Christianity is a large house. He sees his particular calling or role as removing obstacles to faith, clearing the sidewalk, as it were, of rocks and roadblocks and anything else that might stand in the way of someone crossing the threshold and entering in. And as people enter, in Lewis's picture, they find themselves in a hallway with doors all along either side, and the doors are labeled. Roman Catholic, says one, Orthodox, Presbyterian, Assemblies of God, Episcopalian, United Methodist, Vineyard, Calvary Chapel, Jesuit, Benedictine, Independent, non-denominational, red letter Christians. Lewis says it is in these rooms, not in the hall, that there are fires and chairs and meals. The hall is a place to wait in, a place from which to try the various doors, not a place to remain. So how do you get out of the hallway? How do you get into the room where there are fires and chairs and meals? Lewis says, you must be asking which door is the true one, not which door pleases you the most. The question should never be, do I like that kind of church service? But are these doctrines true? All these many years of reading Mere Christianity, I feel like I've missed the really big thing that Lewis is saying here. I feel like I've been focused on mere Christianity, but Lewis says quite plainly, that's not where we remain. Now, there is a core. The death of Jesus Christ has made us right with God, but we live out that conviction in 1,000 different rooms, in 1,000 different ways, as God calls each of us to the specific work that we are called to do. How do we negotiate profound differences between us? Here's Lewis's advice, quote, "When you have reached your own room, be kind to those who have chosen different doors and to those who are still in the hall. If they are wrong, they need your prayers all the more. And if they are your enemies, then you are under orders to pray for them. That is one of the rules common to the whole house," end quote. When you have reached your room, be kind. Be kind. Be kind and pray. How do we deal with deep, heartfelt core differences? Or, in the light of the theme of our conference, what are the virtues that guide our common life? How does virtue guide the way that we treat one another, especially the way we treat people who are very different from ourselves, who have chosen different doors? As we dig into this, it's important to emphasize Lewis is not talking about different preferences. He's not talking about matters of taste. He's not talking about disagreements we may have about the architecture of our buildings, the style of our music, the color of our carpet, or the quality of our Sunday school programs. He's talking about truth. The key question, he says, is this: is there truth here? I should live out my faith according to what I believe to be true. And that means that other members of the family of God, people who have chosen other rooms, will not just disagree with me about matters of style, but about life and death matters. We think of Lewis as a champion of mere Christianity, and I am amazed to see how much he has to say, not about the things that unite us, but the things that divide us. And I believe that this issue looms with some urgency. Some of you may have seen a recent study. It came out June the 12th. It was done by the Pew Research Foundation. And it looked at political trends over the past 20 years. The Pew Foundation research pictured the political spectrum as a kind of continuum from liberal to conservative. And in the case of this study, they found that there's been a significant shift in the last 20 years. But the shift may not be what you think. The shift was not a shift from less liberal and more conservative, less conservative to more liberal. The shift was this: it was a shift away from the center toward the ends. According to the Pew Research study, in the past 20 years, the middle ground has been shrinking and the partisan gulf is getting wider. They found that the number of people at the ends of the spectrum has doubled in the last 20 years. And not only that, but they found that people who fall at the ends of the spectrum are growing increasingly hostile to one another. As a report puts it, quote, "Growing ideological uniformity on both sides is leading an increasing number of Americans to see followers of the other party as a threat to the nation's well-being," end quote. The study also observed that dislike of people on the opposite side of the political spectrum has grown, with about a third of the far-right and far-left Americans saying that they would be unhappy if a family member married someone from an opposite ideology. The Pew Foundation expects this trend to continue, and here's why. According to their research, we are in the process of creating what they call ideological echo chambers. The music we listen to, what movies we watch, the places we get our news. We have more choices and we have more control. So we're tending to inch away from the middle toward the left or the right. Does that seem accurate to you? If you looked at the list of the books you read this year, would they represent a wide variety of perspectives? Would there be voices from all across the continuum? When you think about the radio shows that you prefer, the movies that you watch, the blogs that you read, the items on your Facebook news feed, do you see contrast, breadth, diversity, disagreement? Do you hear a variety of voices? I think of the advice I once heard from a professor. He said to make it a point to read books from people that you profoundly disagree with. I think of advice from C.S. Lewis to remove our gaze from the mirrored face, or the advice of St. Francis to seek to understand, to actively seek out those who are different from ourselves, to welcome the stranger. Now, Lewis has been described accurately as a great debater, a strong defender of the Christian faith. That's true. But perhaps not enough has been said about how he went about that. His eagerness to listen and his desire to understand contrasting and opposing views. Now, one of the lesser read books by C.S. Lewis is a book called The Personal Heresy, and it collects a series of essays that show his series of debates with a literary critic named E.M.W. Tilliard. Now, this book is particularly interesting for those of us who are Lewis scholars, because in it we can see a first-hand account of how Lewis went about arguing with someone that he disagreed with. His gentleness, his kindness, and his humility are striking. He is blunt, but he is kind. And here's the thing. In summarizing his encounter with Tilliard, Lewis says, above all else, that he is grateful for the opportunity to discuss their disagreements, because Lewis describes himself as someone who is hungry for rational opposition. Hungry for it. Not willing to put up with it. Not tolerant of it. But hungry for it. Eager to go out of his way to engage with those who have different points of view. How should we respond to deeply entrenched disagreements? The response that seems to crop up most often is the idea of tolerance. And definitions of tolerance read like this: recognizing and respecting the beliefs of others, supporting the rights of something that I do not approve of, cultivating a permissive attitude toward opinions and practices that differ from my own, allowing conduct that is not in accord with my preferences. Well, as it happens, the word tolerance dates back to the 14th century, and it comes to English from Old French. In its original sense, the word tolerance is the same root word as the word fortitude. Do you remember Lou Marcos talking about fortitude? Aristotle said fortitude is not one of the cardinal virtues. It is the virtue that makes all other virtues possible. Fortitude is every virtue as its point of testing. And I like that robust sense of what tolerance entails, but I think that we tend in our culture to subscribe to a very watered down view of tolerance. In fact, often when we talk about tolerance, what we mean is, I've already made up my mind. I already think you're wrong. But out of the magnanimity of my heart, I'm willing to put up with you. I think that's a bit sinister. And it seems such an inadequate starting place for real connection between people made in the image of God. I do have to say that even a limited view of tolerance is better than violence. In the news this spring was the story of a 22-year-old young man named Elliot Rodger. He lived in Santa Barbara, which is just a couple miles north of where I live. On a Friday night, he drove through a popular night spot in the college town, and he started shooting. 6 people were killed and 13 more were injured, people he disagreed with, people who refused to go along with his point of view. Violence is a horrible response to disagreement, difference, impatience, and anger. The Santa Barbara shooting was very close to home. And it hurts even more because I'm dealing with 21 and 22-year-old students all the time. Elliot Rogers' age, his impatience, his profound sense of rejection, all that hits close to home too, especially in light of the Pew Foundation research that says that we're getting more isolated from one another. But what really troubles me is that there is a manifestation of this violence that's even more pervasive than a young man with a gun. And I see it on the internet, on Facebook all the time, on Twitter, and in comments left on blog posts. It's the pervasive impulse to diminish, to mock, to label, and to humiliate. There was a recent incident you may have heard about at Sinclair Community College. It's a complicated situation, as these situations tend to be, but there's a particular part of it I really want to focus on for just a minute. I've tried to take this story out of this talk, and I keep on coming back to it. I can't seem to shake it. Something happened there at Sinclair that it deeply troubles my soul. Here's what happened. Peter LaBarbera is a conservative speaker. He was given half an hour to express his views at a campus event. A group of about 100 students planned ahead to fill the seats of the auditorium where he was sitting. And when LaBarbera stood up to start talking, they all stood up too, and they walked out. About a dozen students remained in the auditorium. The write-ups of this event in the press called this event hilarious. They said it was a hoot. They called it wildly successful. It was written up on Salon where it was labeled best protest ever. Salon concluded its article by saying it was a beautiful, beautiful thing. Talking about the virtues this week. We're seeking to grow in how we understand virtue, how we live lives of virtue, how we make virtue relevant and powerful to this generation. So here's the thing. What happened to Peter LaBarbera broke my heart, and it doesn't have anything to do with conservative perspectives or liberal politics or how we understand human sexuality. When I read the story, it broke my heart because of the way that those students conspired together to humiliate someone because they disagreed with him. Now, there are two parts to that. One part is the conspiring, using our minds, our intellect, our gifts of time and talent to deliberately cause another person harm. Dante has a lot to say about that. Sins that are the result of impulse or appetite are considered far less serious than sins that involve pre-planning, premeditation, and fraudulent behavior. Our legal system still has this distinction in place. Premeditated harm is different than impulsive or careless behavior. Saying something that hurts someone can happen for any one of a number of reasons. But setting out and working together to hurt somebody, that's something else. The other part of this story that's hard for me is the way that it devalues the worth of human beings. C.S. Lewis stood right here and said, there are no ordinary people, and therefore our merriment must be of the kind which exists between people who have, from the outset, taken each other seriously. No flippancy, no superiority, no presumption. How should we treat people with whom we have difference? Not little difference, but big ones. Differences about what we believe to be true, about principles and policies that we think ought to guide our daily life. Well, indifference is one option. You do your thing, I do mine. Violence is an option. Something inside me snaps and I seek to hurt those who hurt me. Or humiliation. I conspire to shut you down, to silence your point of view and make you look ridiculous. I gotta believe in something higher. I gotta believe that if the death of Jesus Christ has somehow made me right with God, that the life of Jesus Christ must somehow teach me to live in tenderness and compassion, understanding and patience with people, with persons, because all of us are made in the image of God. And when working with this idea and working over this summer to try all I could to try to make that image practical, I've been helped by a visual image, a word picture, something that keeps it alive for me, makes it specific and concrete. And that's the idea of intellectual hospitality. It's not my term. I started to see this term pop up maybe 5 or 6 years ago. And I love the image because hospitality invites us to consider the table, a seminar table, a dinner table, a communion table. I love the image of coming together at table. It gives us something strong and specific and concrete. The table connects us. It becomes the center that we gather around. It relates us. Julia Reinhardt Lupton says the table defines or fashions a space that invites conversation and deliberation as well as the sharing of meals. She says that the table, unlike the couch, distributes distance while also creating the possibility of face-to-face. The table is quite literally the support not only of plates, notebooks, and Sabbath candles, but also of the spacing that sustains human relationships, end quote. The table connects us, as Lupton says, but it also constrains us. It invites a connection. But by defining space, it creates safety, structure, ritual, and distance. The image of the table helps us put two separate impulses together. The impulse to gather and the impulse to maintain a healthy space. But I think in order for this image to help us, we may need to deepen our grasp on the whole concept of hospitality. Hospitality has deep roots in classical literature. Some of you may remember studying the Iliad or the Odyssey or the Aeneid. If you were lucky enough to spend some time with these great works, someone probably explained to you that in ancient literature, there's a principle of hospitality at work. It's called xenia, and it's usually translated guest friendship. In ancient classical tradition, xenia is a series of guidelines or rules for how to gather around the table, how to be a host, how to be a guest. Immediately on his arrival, the stranger was clothed and provided for, and no inquiry was made as to his name or his business. The stranger at the door was welcomed and cared for, and in response, the guest showed respect to the host and pledged to fight to defend their well-being. The concept of xenia is based on the ancient myths where gods and goddesses would walk through the neighborhoods knocking on doors. Dressed as ordinary human beings, they would show up to see what would happen. Zeus himself would often dress up as an ordinary human being. The idea of xenia takes a positive form in Hebrews 13:2, where we are told, "Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for by this some have entertained angels without knowing it." This requires a shift in our thinking. We don't usually think about hospitality. We think about entertaining. We invite our friends, we invite people that we know to come to our houses. We clean and we vacuum, we buy fresh flowers, and we cook very special meals. Now, we enjoy one another's company, but we are thinking about presenting our best face and seeking to impress, and as Lewis says, our eye is still on the mirror. But in Homer's time, all strangers were under the protection of Zeus. Or perhaps were even Zeus in his most distressing disguise, and all strangers deserved welcome. Not friends, but strangers. Not entertaining, but hospitality. Not prepared, but spur of the moment, and not to impress, but to embrace and care for. Let's take this idea of hospitality back to the classroom. When I ask my students to engage with unfamiliar ideas, with strangers they find in the pages of the books that they're required to read, they typically have 3 different responses. The first response, they dismiss it. This is stupid. The second response, they attack the author. This author is an idiot. The third response is to disengage. I am not going to read this guy. But I don't want my students to do any of that. I want my students to grow bigger. I want my students to honestly engage with the material, to listen patiently and seek to understand, to slow down, to be patient, to ask good questions. I want them to consider the possibility that even the most far-fetched idea may contain a grain of truth, or may offer some new insight, or may catalyze some new understanding. Keegan Osinski says, quote, "Hospitality is necessary for learning." Why? Because every idea, arithmetic, history, chemistry, literature, every new idea begins as a foreign one. And if we never allowed a new idea in, we would never learn anything. Peter Elbow suggests that we grow in our ability to offer intellectual hospitality primarily by doing this, by stirring up the habit of curiosity, by improving our ability to ask good questions and our desire to understand new things. He suggests that we learn to play what he calls the believing game. Now, this has been compared to taking a new idea out for a test drive, pushing its buttons, twisting its knobs, pressing the accelerator, seeing where it goes. When we encounter a new idea, we do not have to commit to it, invest in it, or even learn to like it, but we should seek first to understand. We should be able to examine it, to engage with it, to engage with one another, and to ask good questions. What is interesting or helpful about this point of view? What are some features of this point of view that others perhaps have not noticed? What worldview is this based on? What are the implications of this? How does it play out long term? And while I may not support this view, are there possibly underlying assumptions that are worthy, beautiful, good, and true? Again, quoting Osinski, intellectual hospitality encourages us to actually engage with new ideas, not merely contradict them, dismiss them, dispute them, reject them, or ridicule them. When people insist on exercising skepticism or distrusting and refusing all ideas, discussion tends to dissolve into a power struggle in which the winners and losers are caught in a cycle of hatred and strife. And I think she's right. I think the believing game results in a new and perhaps better kind of critical thinking. Again, as Lewis says, it is worthwhile listening or reading. It is worth doing it attentively. We must attend even to discover that something is not worth our attention. Again, building on our conference theme, intellectual hospitality is built on our commitment to becoming people of good character. Intellectual hospitality requires generosity. I don't have much, but I share what I have. My little lunch, my loaves and fishes are broken and given, and that becomes the site for connection and community. Intellectual hospitality requires humility. Guest and host relationship involves give and take, listening and speaking, taking and receiving. It involves security. I believe that truth is durable and doesn't need my shrill defense. It involves patience, slowing down, taking time. It involves curiosity, paying attention. And it involves mutuality. When I engage with intellectual hospitality, I have certain responsibilities, but likewise the guest has certain responsibilities. The guest does not barge in through the door. The guest must not kick the cat. And the guest in my house had better not rearrange my furniture. In short, intellectual hospitality invites us to be better people, to cultivate generosity, humility, kindness, and patience, to overcome selfishness, insecurity, and suspicion, to abandon shaming, bullying, to avoid pretense and isolation and open up the doors of our lives. I think that ultimately intellectual hospitality is useful because what it calls us to do is to refuse to answer evil with evil and to persist always in overcoming evil with good. Those students in my class last semester, they worked hard in their reading journals, seeking to understand the stories that we were reading, trying to leave their assumptions and their agendas at the door, avoiding presumption. We gathered around the seminar table and we learned what we could from close reading of our book. And somehow what we learned about reading started to transfer to the way that we began to treat one another. We kept repeating our mantra, seek first to understand, and at first it was not easy. My students wanted so much to jump on each other, correct each other, argue about things. In that classroom, people stepped on each other's toes, and we interrupted each other's sentences. And to be honest, I was the worst offender. Things got pretty heated last semester, but somewhere along the line, as weeks went by, things turned around. My students learned to give each other space and time. They learned to ask a clarifying question rather than to immediately pounce with a challenge, a correction, or a contradiction. They learned that people have reasons for the things that they believe. And they learned that situations tend to be far more complicated than they first appear. Something really special happened in that classroom with a group of students who were more diverse than any group I have ever worked with anywhere. And so by the end of the semester, after things had completely turned around, the students were so enjoying our time together, they asked if we could keep meeting. So we finished Mere Christianity, and they said, could we read another book together? Could we? So we started the Dante Club. And these days, instead of meeting around the seminar table in the classroom, we meet at my house. We gather around my dining room table. And just as in the days of our course, Carly is always the first to arrive, even though she has the furthest to travel. She's always done the reading, and she always has things to say. Scott shows up, sits in the back looking a little rumpled and distracted, like maybe he didn't get much sleep last night. A few months ago, I asked Jeremy if he could plant a small vegetable garden in my backyard. And so when my students arrive, we pick tomatoes from the backyard and we make salad together. We cook dinner and we pull out our books and we listen. We listen hard to what Professor Dante has to say. And here's what we've discovered. It's not that we have great food and great conversation in spite of our differences. It's that we have great food and great conversation because of our differences. The virtue of intellectual hospitality has tremendous implications in my classroom and at my university. It seems to me to be a healthy antidote to the polarization of our age. It is a concept I find helpful when I listen to a conference speaker, respond to a book I'm reading, or write a comment on a blog post on the internet. Now, intellectual hospitality doesn't mean assent. It doesn't mean that I blindly adopt or affirm every idea I encounter, and it doesn't mean that I hold back from those things I truly believe. What it does mean is that I seek first to understand, and I pray for patience as well as courage. And ultimately, if I still disagree, if the idea proves to be something that I do not believe to be true, I strive to be guided by Lewis's advice. I try to be kind to those who have made different choices. And I try to remember to pray. But perhaps the biggest impact this semester has had on me is happening in a different realm of my life altogether. You see, I have a 12-year-old daughter. Hi, Sierra. She's 12 years old, and I'm finding that lately things are changing. There are books she wants to read, and video games she wants to play. And I'm not sure I'm all that excited about some of her choices. And besides, life gets busy. You know what I mean? And so when Sierra Grace comes up with some new thing she wants to try, some new book she wants to have, some new gadget that's absolutely required, my first impulse is to interrupt and try to shut her down. And that's when Sierra Grace looks me in the eye and says, "Mom, aren't you always talking about intellectual hospitality, Mom?" Man. I take a deep breath. I slow down. I seek to understand. Where is she coming from? What is going on with her? Why is this so important all of a sudden? I picture a table that connects and also constrains us. I picture my daughter, a child of God, an eternal being, no ordinary person. Jesus died for her to make her right with God. And with God's help, I desire to treat her that way. I picture a door, the door to my room, the door to my choices, the door to my understanding of what is true and good and beautiful. And I see my daughter as standing, knocking on that door. How will I respond to her and to the others in our culture who stand knocking? Will I offer her hospitality? Am I learning to listen? Will I seek first to understand? Will I ask good questions? My daughter, my students, my family, my friends, the stranger, the one I disagree with, the person I do not understand, my opponents, my enemies. The rules for the household of faith call for kindness, patience, and prayer. How will we answer that call? Thank you.